Welcome everybody who's watching, and welcome Kel. Great to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So for all those out there who don't know you yet for some reason, a quick intro to you. You're a serial entrepreneur who has started multiple companies, among them the photo platform Flickr, the online game Glitch, and of course the communication software Slack. Today, you're the CTO of the company and on a mission to sort of revolutionize the workplace as we know it. And I've also found out two random facts about you. One, you're the one who brought emojis to Slack. So I guess thank you very much for that. And two, you're a true coffee addict. So my first question, have you had your coffee yet? Because I know in San Francisco it's in the morning. And where are we reaching you exactly?
Yeah. I'm joining you from my basement office in San Francisco, and I've already had my coffee for the morning. So everything's going well here this morning. Thank you.
Okay, so we are all set up for this fireside chat. Great. The past months have been a roller coaster for most people who are watching us today. Can you share a bit about your spring, your summer? How has it been for you personally, but also for your company, Slack?
It's like for everybody. I think it's been a real challenge. And when we, back in March, when we realized that we were going to have to close our offices globally and send people home, I mean, we weren't ready for that in the same way that no other organizations were ready for it. And in fact, if you had asked me the week before, is it possible for us to send all of our employees home overnight and come back and be productive the next day, I would have said that's impossible. Like, moving an organization of that size and that complexity completely remote is an incredible challenge. And first priority for us was the kind of health and safety of our employees. But I think we saw that we had an important role to play as companies transition to that work from home, because it wasn't just us as an organization. It was every organization was scrabbling to understand how they could be productive in this environment. And I think in many ways, this shift to distributed work has been an acceleration in trends that were already happening. And I don't just mean like fully distributed organizations, because that has been happening, especially with smaller companies, over the last decade, but really a shift to more flexible work, as we find, the allowing, as organizations get more complex and more global and more collaborative, the idea of everybody being in the same room just hasn't really been true for large organizations for some time. As you're working with people, maybe on a different floor in your building, but maybe also in a different city across the world. And so I think that we were already setting the stage for how do we work better in distributed organizations, and now we were suddenly forced to. And I think that thrust us into the situation where the tools that we'd built weren't built for distributed, weren't built for a pandemic, but worked really well.
Like Slack wasn't really built for a pandemic, right? I mean, you use it too. You work in a central office normally. What have you learned in the past months, now that Slack is sort of becoming a tool to navigate through the pandemic? What have you learned about your software and the way people use it?
Yeah, well, I think one of the first things that we saw was that there's more deeper and mature usage from our customers. So we, when the pandemic started, we had a lot of new customers, but our existing customers started spending more time on Slack as well. People moved from, kind of 90 minutes on average a day actively using Slack to 2 hours or more. Wow. We saw a really big, people are just spending more time in Slack versus in person. Of course, that makes a lot of sense. We saw a triple the rate in which people integrated the other tools they're using into Slack. So that's like your G Suite, Office 365, Salesforce, or if you're a developer like GitHub or Figma. And we saw that rate really increase. So people really wanting to tie together all of the tools they're using, and massive growth in the number of people using video.
I wanted to jump in here. I saw that post of your CEO, Stuart Butterfield, who shared a screenshot on Twitter with like this crazy growth rate. I think it was like 100,000 new users per 10 minutes or something in that direction. How did you scale at that pace, like in a technical sense?
Yeah, I think, after the health and safety of our employees, like priority number one back in March and April was make sure we're reliable and available for our customers, because it was a big spike in usage. And, we had some kind of preparation advancements there. We're a fairly global, organization. About half of our customers are outside of North America. So our traffic is somewhat evenly distributed around the world, but we saw a really big influx there. Now, luckily, that's something we've been kind of preparing for in general, as the company has been growing pretty fast over the last, say, 5 years. And so while that was kind of our real concentration for the first couple of months, I think we were lucky in that we'd been building towards that for many years. And we've seen this massive increase in usage, people on the platform every day, number of messages they're sending every day. Every minute on Slack, millions of messages get sent and delivered, and that just increased throughout the year here. But that was our priority number one. And I think, when the way that we see Slack used by our customers is that it is the way that they work. It is the way that they communicate with people in their workplace. And that means it has to work every second of every day, because it's the way that you're connected, to your coworkers. And so I think we take that, responsibility very seriously of it. It just has to work. It's a piece of infrastructure for the world.
Now, you've been touching on the topic of digital transformation. You said earlier also that, or in earlier talks, this is kind of the end of the email at the workplace. Why do you think that?
Well, I think it's the beginning of the end. It's going to take a long time for anything to supplant email, right? Because we're 40-something years into this email journey, and it's the pretty kind of ubiquitous medium for communication inside the workplace and out. But it really was never designed for workplace communication. I think the biggest drawback is probably, at the core of it, which is the inbox model, which is, if you and I work together, we each have our unique view on information in the company, and everybody has that unique view, and some of it's shared, but you have to, explicitly choose who sees each bit of information. And maybe if I'm sending a message to a colleague and it might be interesting to you, do I CC you? That's kind of an imposition which forces you to read it. But if I don't, then you'll never know what's happening. And so everybody has this siloed view of what's happening inside an organization. And you also have the cold start and end problem. If you're joining a team or a company and you use email, you start on day one with an empty inbox and no information about what's happened before, no context, and you gradually build that up over time. That's part of joining a new organization. You learn what's going on, how decisions are made, what happened last week, last month, last year. But then you leave that team and all the information in your inbox dies. It's gone. It's inaccessible to anybody else. For organizations that run on channels, the concept just at the core of Slack is that it's topic-based, team-based, discipline-based, and you can join or leave at any time and kind of dip in and out of that information stream. It makes bringing people up to speed very quick, gets everybody on the same page and aligned, and allows projects to live on beyond the people who are working on them on any particular day.
Obviously, you have a lot of experience in convincing people to change from email to like channel-based messaging. And I know a lot of people who are watching us today have sort of a similar challenge in a sense of digital transformation. They have now teams sitting at home and need to get them on new technologies, on new platforms. Can you share some advice how to do that? Because I know it's easy, it's hard to change the habit of one person, but of a whole team, that's really difficult. How do you convince people?
Yeah, and I think that we recognize that as a challenge from the beginning of the company, was that we don't have to convince somebody to give it a try. We have to convince somebody to convince their coworkers to give it a try.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of barrier to adoption is one of the reasons why we went with the kind of freemium model from the beginning, of we want it to be really easy, not to just adopt at a company, but to adopt in a small team. We want to make sure that
I mean not
like
in the sense of the affordability. I mean more of in the sense of like a cultural change,
Yeah. No, I meant the freemium model in the everything we can remove from friction for giving it a try, because the real hump to get over is like, I don't know, I'm comfortable with email. I've been using it for a decade. It's how my organization works. Yeah. And it is a shift, right? And it's a shift that it takes time to get used to. I think the the prevailing trend that really helps us there, and one of the, I think, motivations behind the company to begin with, is the rise of messaging in the consumer space. So you probably don't email with your friends and family anymore. You use WhatsApp, you use iMessage, you use Facebook Messenger, WeChat, Line, depending on where in the world you are. And people are used to that way of working, right? And it's somewhat kind of crazy that we have adopted these much better tools in the consumer space, and we're still using email in the workplace, which is essentially like digitized inter-office memos, right? They have a subject line. We talk about carbon copies. You have a greeting and you have a footer signature saying, please don't print this, save the trees. And there's all this kind of infrastructure around just being able to send a message to somebody else. And it's so heavyweight, for email, it might be a great vehicle for somebody you're talking to for the first time, but for somebody you exchange hundreds or thousands of messages with a week because you're, working in close collaboration with them. It's just not a medium designed for that. So I think the thinking about how do I communicate outside of the workplace and why aren't I using those same advantages when I'm when I'm in the office or in the virtual office this year?
Apart from messaging, what's your prediction for the workplace post-COVID? What's one thing that you're excited about, and maybe another thing that you kind of have a stomachache about?
So I think, for this isn't going to be universal. For some organizations, when they're able to, they'll just go back to how they were working before. But I think largely the big shift that we're going to see is we'll see some portion of people who want to stay fully remote forever, and some portion of people who want to just be back in an office every day. But I think the bulk of people, certainly here in North America, are going to want a lot more flexibility. Now that we've demonstrated that people can work remotely, maybe I only want to come into the office 2 days a week because I need to spend time with my coworkers. I need to, whiteboard kind of brainstorming sessions definitely still work much better in person. We haven't figured out a way to make those work well over the internet. But when I'm doing my own kind of focused work, I can do that better from home. But also I can shift my hours, around childcare or like cutting down on commute or, because I'm in a different time zone. And so I think we're going to see a huge number of people who want flexibility in when they're in the office and the hours in which they work. And that, I think the biggest implication, or the two really big implications of that, one is that it makes work much more accessible to a greater number of people. You can employ people outside of the city that that your company is based in, and you can employ people who wouldn't be able to work for you otherwise. But also, it's really going to change the feel of the office. The office is no longer by default going to be the place where everybody has a desk, everybody comes into every day and sits there doing their own, focused work at their desk. I think how the office feels in our relationship to the office, that change is going to be really significant. And it's not clear what it's going to feel like yet. For some companies who, have allowed some people back to the office with, like daily temperature checks and one person in the elevator at once and desks 20 feet apart. That's a temporary measure. But what will offices feel like 6 months or a year or 2 years from now, when it becomes much more of a collaborative space? It's a place you go to meet with people as opposed to do your work. And so I think there hasn't really been a big change to the office in 50 years or longer, probably, than when we started first getting kind of the concept of office workers. And I think this is going to be a real disruption to what it feels like to go to work as a knowledge worker.
We are almost at the end of this talk. I just want to shoot one quick question. I saw, to my surprise, that you tweeted that Slack is a big user of Zoom. Why don't you use your own video conferencing tool, and why don't you make it better? I think it's sort of like a pain to use it, actually. And I understand why you also are big Zoom users.
Yeah, I think that, we from the beginning, we saw that, voice and video calling are kind of like a necessary component, in the office, but they're also a commodity. It's like everybody has voice and video, and that's, it's been around for a long time, starting with Skype, and Zoom has built a fantastic product, and I'm a Zoom user every day. I think we're really concentrated on the things which we can do differently, which is the channel-based communication. And when we look across our customer base, which is from the kind of smallest 2-person corner shops to the, Fortune 10, many of them already have a way they work on video. it's Zoom, it's Microsoft Teams, it's Cisco WebEx, or BlueJeans, and we want to plug into whichever one of those you use. You should be able to use it with Slack and, seamlessly kick off a call in a channel. And, so we're really concentrated on the channel's core use case.
But I guess the stock market didn't like that so much. Your stock dropped recently because of this Morgan Stanley report saying that, Zoom and all these other competitors are getting more of the COVID spending. What do you have in store to make up there?
Yeah, and I think what we saw at the beginning of COVID was that organizations wanted to first take how they work in the office and move it online. They wanted, we used to have meetings, now we'll just do video meetings. And that was important in that transition. But I think that synchronous video meetings are going to become less and less important over time. And so we're really concentrated on the kind of next wave of what it looks like to work asynchronously. So whether that's asynchronous voice and video, whether it's better tools to be working when you're not directly together in an online meeting, hopefully the vision of work for the future is not 8 hours a day spent on a video call. And, we're really just starting to understand what that's going to look like.
Yeah. Okay, we have to wrap up here, but one last question. What's your main productivity advice for all people watching us today?
Other than using Slack, I would say it's, using, getting deeper into the features of Slack, understanding how to prioritize, how to focus, how to use do not disturb mode, to be able to manage your information flow.
Okay, thanks, Cal. And to everybody watching us, if you have questions to Cal, he'll be in the Ask Me Anything question afterwards. And with that, to you, Nico.
Thank you so much, Hannah and Cal.